Hello, friends. I am so glad you're here this morning. We are actually going to work on estimation and rounding of decimals today. So, the first thing that I did was I put up our vocabulary words. So, if you'll take a minute and look at those words, the first word is to estimate. This is a verb meaning to find the answer that's close to the real answer. So, find the answer that's close to the real answer. So, it means about the same. And with rounding, we're replacing a number with a simpler number close to the value. So it's an approximate answer, which means it's about the same. For instance, if a car cost $19,997.59 exactly, here's my funky little car, we would say that it costs about $20,000. This helps us add and subtract numbers quickly and use numbers in the real world by making them simpler. It gives us a handy way to estimate the real answers. So, we're going to talk about some rules that go along with rounding numbers. So, there are three main rules for rounding numbers. And remember, you can pause this video at any time to stop and copy down notes or fill in your guided notes. So, the first rule in rounding numbers, I'm going to say rules for rounding. Rules for rounding. All right, rule number one is find the number in the place value you want. I guess maybe I should say find the number in the place value you want to round to, or the rounding number. So this is the rounding number. And look at the digit one place to its right. Look at the digit one place to the right. So let's take the number 8.34. 8.34, and we're going to round to the nearest tenth. If it helps you, like it helps me, make your place value chart. We know this is the ones, we know this is the tenths, and this is the hundredths. The place value we are rounding to is the tenths. So that's what we're rounding to. So we have to move one place value to the right. So we're going to look at the digit 4. Now, in technicalities, this is going to be 4 hundredths, but we're going to look at it as 4. What you need to know is we are really looking at where in a number line is this number closest or nearest to. So when we look at a number line, it's really easy to do with whole numbers. But let's look at what that looks like with decimals. Remember, decimals are just parts of a whole. They are fractions. But we're going to look and say, okay, for tenths, we know that we're dealing with 8.3. That's 8 and 3 tenths. The next tenth up is going to be 8.4. 8.4 is the next tenth up. So when we look at those two numbers, somewhere in between, smack dab in the middle of both of these numbers, is going to come the halfway point. Now remember, when you're dealing with whole numbers, A half is going to be a 0.5. So here we are. Our next digit over is going to be a 0.5. So it's 8.35. This is the halfway point between 8.3 and 8.4. Just like with a whole number, we're going to have all these little numbers, these little spaces that come between 8.3 and 8.4. So we're going to go 8.31, 8.32, 8.33, 8.34, 8.35, 8.36, 8.37, 8.38, 8.39, and then we have 8.4. So when we look at this number line, we see right here, as we walked through, this is going to be 8.34. Let me relabel that. 8.34. If we look at where this falls on the number line, we can see that 8.34 is closer to 8.3 than it is to 8.4. The line and the distance between is actually shorter between these two numbers, which leads us to our next rule. So rule number 2 is, if the digit to the right is 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4, you do not change the rounding digit, but replace all digits to the right with zeros. So I'm going to make this much simpler for you. 4 or less, let it rest. Use zeros to the right. So again, in the example of 8.34, the tenths is what we're rounding to. The hundredths is what we have to look at. Our hundredths right here, this number right here, is 4 or less. Let it rest means we're not going to change this 3. We're not going to change it at all. So this stays 8.3. It rests where it is, 8.3. We can put zeros on here to the right. That doesn't change the value. 8 and 3/10 is the same as 8 and 30/100, which is the same as 8 and 300,000ths. But we don't need those, so we can just write our number as 8.3 because those zeros don't change the value. So when we round 8.3 to the nearest tenth, 8.34 to the nearest tenth, our answer is 8.3. The final rule kind of goes along with that. So rule number 3 is, if the digit one place to the right is 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9, add 1 to the rounding digit and replace all digits to its right with zeros. So again, 5 or more, raise the score. Use zeros to the right. We're going to use a different example for this because our first example, 8.34, doesn't really fit in with that at all. So let's try this number, 795 rounded to the nearest hundred, Okay, if you need to make your place value chart, go for it. We have ones, tens, hundreds because we're dealing with whole numbers. The number that we're rounding to is hundreds. One place to the right of that is the number 9. Is 9 5 or more? Why, yes, it is. 9 is 5 or greater. So we're going to raise this number by 1. So we're going to go in here and say, okay, 7 plus 1 equals 8. That's going to be our new number in the hundreds place, 8. And then everything to the right is going to be zeros, 0, 0. We do have to put these zeros in here as placeholders when we're dealing with numbers to the left of the decimal or whole numbers. So we can check ourselves and say, okay, if we made a number line, here's our number line. The first 100 we're dealing with is this 700 because that's what's in that place value. The next 100 that we're going to deal with is 800 because that's the 100 more. Somewhere in between here is going to be 750. And then 795 is going to be right here. The distance between 700 and 795 is way bigger than the distance between 795 and 800. That's why we round up to the nearest 100 because 795 is nearest to 800. You're going to have the opportunity to practice several times, and so make sure that you go in and look carefully at the video and the examples given to you, and make sure that you know how to explain how you found your answer. Stay tuned for video number 2.